Well, good morning, everyone. I'm here this morning to present to you the final urban mobility and transportation strategy prepared by our consultant Steer, which is very much in its last revision, just to dot some I's and cross some T's. It has been in the works for a couple of years now. You may recall that I presented both to yourselves and to Council near the end of 2020 to first introduce you to the urban mobility strategy, and second, highlight some additional work that Steer had done for us regarding the impacts of COVID-19 on Oakville's transportation. So that piece on COVID has now formed part of this final strategy document. I won't be discussing that piece much at all, though, this morning. Instead, I'm going to focus on all the other great stuff that you can find in this strategy. But before I do that, I will point out that our intent is to present this final strategy to Council at the P&D meeting on February 14, with your endorsement, of course, to do so. First, I want to set some context very quickly. Oakville is growing and continues to grow. Halton's integrated growth management strategy indicates that Oakville will grow to about 375,000 people and 180,000 jobs by the year 2051. Our 2018 Transportation Master Plan indicates that we can no longer continue to widen roads in order to accommodate more people in Oakville. And quite frankly, even if we could, I don't believe we'd want to. 6 to 8 lane roads everywhere in Oakville does not create a livable community. So this is one of the reasons that the town has embraced a new urban structure based on a system of growth nodes and corridors founded on a network of higher order transit and active transportation in order to accommodate future growth. And last but not least, Council has declared a climate change emergency, meaning that we need to look for ways to reduce our impact on climate change. The town's community energy strategy indicates that transportation accounts for almost half of community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, and that the heating and cooling of our homes accounts for another 27% of our community's greenhouse gas emissions. So these two things account for almost 77% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So just remember these two things, as they're important later on, as I'll show you. So now let's turn to the urban mobility and transportation strategy and see what it has to say. Steer is very clear that the town of Oakville has long developed around the private automobile. And as a result, the predominant auto-dependent built form in Oakville and the prevailing transport mode of choice of its residents, i.e. the private automobile, reflects that history. And Steer indicates that right now, Oakville is at a turning point in its development. Steer follows this up with a warning that if things do not change, the town will not be able to accommodate the demands of the future that come from existing within a growing region. So this is flat out saying that we won't be able to make car dependency work in the future, nor will it be able to adapt to an evolving transportation landscape. So think connected and automated vehicles, electric vehicles, advances in micromobility, such as electric scooters and bike share and all those things. Nor will it be able to respond to a changing climate. And I think this is pretty clear that if we continue with how we've grown and developed in the past as a car dependent community, we simply won't be able to respond in a meaningful way to climate change. Because the focus in Oakville has historically emphasized private automobiles as the primary way to move people around, we asked Steer to provide us with a strategy going forward that would flip what we prioritize as a way to facilitate a shift from cars towards other choices of mobility. We now need to see pedestrians, cyclists, and transit riders at the top of our priorities. They must become the most important users of our transportation system. And then this is then followed by people doing business and providing services, AKA goods movement, and high occupancy vehicles, particularly when provided as a service, are also important. People moving in private automobiles are not eliminated from the mix. Their importance or priority is just a lot less. Steer advises that a key to making our urban structure successful is linking transportation and land use planning. The complete community high density growth nodes, like those in our urban structure, will ultimately only work if there are lots of viable choices for moving people. Our urban structure will simply not work if cars continue to be the only viable mode of transport for most residents. And this is why Steer stresses the linking of transportation and land use. First, in order to shift people towards alternative modes, Oakville needs to prioritize those modes. Otherwise, the status quo of auto dependency will continue. And then considering that automobile travel has been emphasized for so long in Oakville, in order to make it viable, safe, and efficient, Oakville almost now needs to overemphasize all of the alternatives just to make these as viable or even more viable as safe, efficient, and accessible mobility choices as the car is today. The key role of our transportation network needs to be moving people, not moving cars, or become car sewers, as Gabe would say. And this leads to the importance of creating complete streets to accommodate as many travel modes as possible, particularly emphasizing transit and active transportation. Second, Oakville needs to develop a human-scale urban form in which these alternative modes of travel are viable and can thrive. Steer argues that Oakville is currently too spread out for more sustainable modes to be viable due to the prevalence of single-use zoning and stringent minimum parking requirements that separate buildings and create lots of separation between homes and key destinations. Therefore, Steer recommends that Oakville concentrate on building complete 15-minute neighborhoods that contain a mix of land uses that can accommodate the day-to-day needs of its residents so that they no longer need to hop in a car for every little thing. What I find really interesting about where Steer's landed with these two directions is that they also align with the two things that I mentioned earlier in regards to Oakville's community energy strategy, our cars and our homes, as the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in Oakville. So if we focus on where Steer is recommending we go, we will also directly address the climate change emergency. So the last thing Steer suggests is that travel demand management initiatives also form an important part of this picture. So the urban mobility and transportation strategy is really a large toolbox or a large collection of tools for Oakville to use, and then a playbook with a list of actions for how these tools can be used to achieve the desired link between mobility and land use. So there are a lot of tools in the toolbox and plays in the playbook, and I'm not going to talk individually about each one, but I do want to give you a sense of the collection that Steer has gathered for us. So here's an overview of the toolbox, grouped by complete streets, 15-minute neighborhoods, and traffic demand management initiatives. The complete streets part of the toolbox focuses on all the elements that Oakville can use with respect to making a street network for all modes of transport. The 15-minute neighborhood part of the toolbox focuses on the ingredients needed to create complete walkable communities. It builds on the key nodes, which Oakville is already developing, how to build identified nodes from scratch, and even suggest how to begin to retrofit our existing established neighborhoods to make them to start to become more like 15-minute neighborhoods. And then lastly, they suggest traffic demand management initiatives, which are ways of reducing the demand on our transportation network. So digging a little deeper, I'll then focus on the top three priorities of the pyramid: walking, cycling, and transit, and then provide some sampling of these suggested tools. So here, Steer identifies some quick wins, or maybe the lowest hanging fruit for pedestrians and cyclists, including the things that you see here, including painted bike boxes, upgrading bike lanes to protected bike lanes, putting in rumble strips, providing secure bike parking. These are identified as some quick wins. Then Steer provides some long-term enhancements that will take a little longer to implement. A key one here for me personally will be winter maintenance, particularly of bike lanes and pedestrian walkways. But it's other things like Vision Zero or similar programs, and creating even more connectivity and integration with our existing networks. With respect to transit, there are a lot of tools that mirror the 7 transit priorities that Council endorsed back in December at Barry Cole's farewell council meeting. And I'm particularly happy again to see the last one here, setting the stage for BRT. What's really interesting is that in a meeting we had with Halton Region earlier this week regarding the preferred growth concept, they actually mentioned that they're starting to see that our numbers, or our population numbers and job numbers in our growth nodes and corridors, could actually even warrant LRT, according to them, not just BRT, if you can believe it. So the playbook part of the strategy includes recommendations on how to use the tools to achieve the vision of complete streets and 15-minute neighborhoods. And it's immediately acknowledged, though, that not all things are actually in Oakville's control, unfortunately. So there needs to be aligned coordination with developers, residents, and particularly Halton region. The strategy acknowledges that Oakville has done some great strategic work in the past, but needs to improve its follow through and suggests that maybe feasibility studies or business cases might be a good technique to accomplish this. The strategy then provides a series of action items aimed to achieve improved strategic documents, these new business cases, and then of course the aligned coordination. And of course, we need to do a better job of monitoring everything we do to implement the strategy. And the document has recommendations on how to do this as well. Perhaps it's already obvious to you then that implementing this strategy will involve more than just a transportation master plan and even an official plan. It cannot be understated that the urban mobility and transportation strategy is bigger than just a TMP. This is a strategy that needs to be worked on and implemented corporation-wide. If we want to start cracking the climate change nut, build complete and walkable communities, focusing on moving people instead of cars, and so on, we need every town department and council doing its part, not only to buy into the message, but also support it and promote it. So that includes the Roads and Works Department, who will be maintaining anything that the engineering department will build, needs to align with our park strategy, our fire master planning, the way our recreation centers are designed and run, our libraries, and so on. All of these need to be part of the implementation of the mobility strategy. STEER suggests that the primary role of the urban mobility strategy is to bridge the gap between our past work and our future work. As the strategy says, Oakville is not starting from zero. The town is already advanced in its pursuit of unified land use and transportation policies in recent years, with 8 growth nodes and 2 growth corridors identified in its urban structure and official plan, and a considerable amount of planning work completed to guide their intensification. In time, this effort will start to pay off, says STEER. The urban mobility and transportation strategy simply builds upon the examples Oakville has already put forward. It presents a high-level strategy for unifying land use and transportation policies at the municipal level to support Oakville's vision for a better tomorrow at current growth nodes, future ones, and everything in between. So where do we go from here? First, we want to present the strategy to council in February. And I think we should stress to council that this strategy is an important part of implementing our townwide urban structure and is key to its success. As the strategy recommends, we need to take action on better linking our transportation policies and land use policies. And what a better opportunity to start than this year in our transportation master plan review work that will be beginning soon, as well as our ongoing official plan review. It's important to point out that a funding strategy for the strategy's recommendations was outside of the scope of STEER's work and therefore does not form part of this strategy. However, we will need to make key budget decisions in order to implement the recommendations, particularly adjusting to new priorities of pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and goods movement before personal automobiles. And when we adjust our priorities, it actually may mean stopping some of the things we are doing now in order to refocus on these priorities. While the strategy does suggest a number of potential quick wins, as I mentioned earlier, that appear easy enough to implement, these all require funding first to implement, aka the capital funding for design and planning that lies within the realm of engineering and construction. And then the next part is how to maintain these features. And this lies with Roads and Works. So it's vital that Roads and Works has the operating funds and the crews to maintain these great features if they are going to continue to be effective in the long term. So yes, we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's exciting work. And this strategy really helps to unify our vision of what we are trying to achieve in Oakville going forward. Thank you.